Officer Ethan Rowley moved through the drifting snow, his breath a steady mist beneath the cold Riverbend moon. At his side padded Axel, the black and tan German shepherd, muscles taut, ears pricked against the silence. The patrol should have been routine, until Axel froze, a guttural growl rising deep in his chest. There, chained to a rusted iron post by the abandoned tracks, a woman slumped forward, her skin pale against the night. Her lips trembled as she whispered through cracked breath, "Please, my husband left me here. Gambling debts. He'll come back to finish it." Ethan's storm-gray eyes hardened as he dropped to one knee, his gloved hands cutting through the cruel bindings while Axel stood guard, snowflakes glinting on his fur like shards of steel. In that frozen moment, one thing was clear. This was no accident. This was a warning. What happened next will test loyalty, tear open hidden truths, and prove that even in the darkest winters, courage and compassion can light the way. Before we begin, leave a comment with your country. Let's see how far this journey travels. The winter night in Riverbend, Colorado, had teeth sharper than any wolf. Snow drifted in sheets across the narrow main street, covering the faded signs of hardware stores and diners with a fresh layer of white silence. Street lamps flickered against the wind, casting halos of pale gold onto the unplowed roads. Beyond town, where the tracks cut through abandoned freight yards and skeletal cottonwoods, the world seemed deserted, hushed beneath the weight of winter. Officer Ethan Rowley adjusted the collar of his thick Navy patrol jacket as he guided his boots through the drifts. Ethan was 37, a tall, broad-shouldered man with the weathered build of someone who had worked in uniform most of his adult life. A native of Colorado, he had once dreamed of becoming a lawyer, but had followed his father into the sheriff's office instead. His storm-gray eyes carried a mixture of fatigue and resolve, eyes that had seen too much, yet still carried the weight of duty. Tonight, as he walked the patrol route outside Riverbend's town center, those eyes swept the horizon for trouble. Beside him padded Axel, a 5-year-old German shepherd canine with a thick black and tan coat that bristled against the cold. Axel's presence was steadying. The dog was a veteran of many tense moments, drug raids, search and rescue, and nights where silence could break into violence at any second. His ears flicked constantly, scanning the night, nose low to the snow. To Ethan, Axel was more than a partner. He was a guardian in flesh and fur, a reminder that loyalty could exist in its purest form. The patrol was supposed to be routine. Winter nights in Riverbend usually held nothing more sinister than power outages or a stranded motorist. But something felt different tonight. The air carried a weight that pressed against Ethan's instincts. When Axel suddenly stiffened, ears pricked, and released a low growl, Ethan's hand dropped reflexively to the flashlight clipped to his belt. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though his own pulse had quickened. They followed the dog's lead, boots crunching louder as Axel guided him off the road and down a narrow path that cut toward the railway line. The tracks had been abandoned for years, left to rust among the weeds and ice. As Ethan's beam of light swept across the field of snow, it caught something that didn't belong. A figure slumped against a rusted iron post, ropes glinting faintly where the snow had begun to frost over them. Ethan's chest tightened. A woman. He quickened his pace, Axel surging ahead until the chain leash went taut. The figure came into focus. A woman bound at the wrists and waist, her head drooped forward against her chest, dark hair tangled and wet with flakes. Her coat, once green, was ripped at the sleeve, and her boots looked 2 sizes too big, laces broken. Dropping to one knee, Ethan pressed 2 fingers to her throat. A pulse. Weak, but present. He shook her shoulder gently, her eyes fluttered open, and Ethan saw a face gaunt with hunger, lips cracked, bruises blooming along her jawline. She looked about 32, though hardship had etched lines into her features that spoke of someone older. "My name's Ethan Rowley," he said firmly but softly. "You're safe now. Can you tell me your name?" Her voice cracked like brittle glass. "Claire. Claire Donovan." She tried to raise her hands, but the ropes cut into her wrists, raw and bloodied. Ethan worked quickly, pulling a folding knife from his belt to slice through the bindings. Axel stayed alert, hackles still raised, scanning the shadows around them as if expecting the attacker to return. When the ropes fell away, Claire collapsed forward into Ethan's arms, shivering uncontrollably. He draped his heavy patrol jacket around her, tucking the edges close to keep in what little warmth she had left. "He left me here," she whispered, eyes wide with fear. "My husband. He owed money. Gambling. He said, better me than him." Ethan clenched his jaw. He had heard confessions like this before, but each one cut fresh. "Who is he?" "Derek. Derek Donovan," she breathed, almost choking on the name. "He'll come back, if he knows I spoke." "You're not alone anymore," Ethan assured her, steady and calm though his heart thudded with anger. "He won't touch you again, not while I'm breathing." Axel whined softly, nosing at Claire's hand as if to anchor her to the moment, her eyes filled with tears at the dog's gentle insistence. Ethan lifted his radio, calling for backup in an ambulance, though he knew it would take precious minutes to arrive from the county hospital 20 miles away. For now, his job was to keep her alive and safe. But as he scanned the snow-covered ground, a question gnawed at him. Why here? Why leave her bound in plain sight at the edge of the tracks where anyone on patrol might find her? Unless it wasn't just abandonment. Unless it was a message. The shadows pressed closer around them, the night heavy with secrets. Ethan kept his flashlight trained outward, every muscle coiled. He knew Riverbend harbored rot beneath its quiet surface, but tonight it felt like that rot was rising to the surface. At the other end of Riverbend, across town where neon buzzed and whiskey poured, another kind of night played out. Behind the boarded windows of a rundown saloon, a low hum of voices and the clatter of cards filled the smoke-thick air. A man in his mid-40s leaned against the bar, cigar smoke curling around a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. Franklin Mercer, known in whispers as Snake, was the kind of man who built his empire in shadows. His tailored black vest and gold watch chain stood out in the dingy room, reminders that power had no need for humility. Snake had arrived in Riverbend years ago as a drifter, but the town's hidden hunger for vices gave him fertile soil. He started with dice games in alleyways, then poker tables behind locked doors. Now his saloon ran every night, attracting not just desperate men like Derek Donovan, but also city officials who should have known better. Tonight the room buzzed with tension. A game in the back corner had escalated, voices sharp, fists pounding against the table. Snake watched from the shadows, sipping whiskey, his eyes gleaming with predatory calm. "You lose, you pay," he said smoothly to the man arguing at the table, "or you'll learn how cold Riverbend can really get." The man swallowed hard, sliding a crumpled wad of bills across the table. Snake pocketed it without a glance, his gaze already shifting toward the door. He had heard whispers of patrols tightening around town, and he knew sooner or later someone might try to poke around his operation. He smiled thinly. Let them come. Riverbend's snow would bury the foolish. Back at the tracks, Ethan hoisted Claire to her feet, supporting her with one arm while Axel pressed close at their side. The wind howled down the empty rail line, carrying with it the distant echoes of town life, the faint sound of laughter and music carried on the cold. Somewhere out there, the pieces of Claire's story tangled with something larger, something rotten in Riverbend. Ethan looked down at her bruised face, then at Axel, whose steady gaze met his own. This was no simple case of domestic cruelty. He could feel it in his bones. The night was only beginning, and Riverbend was about to reveal its darkest hand. The heater inside the patrol SUV rattled against the cold as Officer Ethan Rowley steered through the swirling snow. Beside him in the passenger seat, Claire Donovan sat wrapped in a blanket, her eyes wide and hollow, as if she were still chained to that iron post by the tracks. Her hands, raw from the ropes, trembled each time the vehicle hit a patch of ice. Axel lay stretched across the back seat, head on his paws, but his amber eyes never left Claire. The dog's vigilance was not lost on Ethan. Axel understood this woman was in danger, and in Axel's world, danger meant protection until the very end. Ethan, still wearing his thick Navy patrol jacket, kept one gloved hand tight on the wheel. His other hand rested on the radio mic clipped to his chest, ready in case Claire's story turned into something bigger than a domestic dispute. The night outside was black but for the shifting white sheets of snow, and the silence between them grew heavier with every mile closer to the station. At last, Ethan spoke, his tone firm but not unkind. "You said your husband left you there. Why? What debt could be worth your life?" Claire's lips parted, voice cracked and low. "Derek. He gambled away everything. Our savings, our house. He borrowed from Franklin Mercer's men. They call him Snake. When he couldn't pay, Snake demanded something else. Derek offered me." She flinched at the memory, pulling the blanket tighter around her frame. "I begged him, Ethan. I begged. But he said it was me or him. Then he walked away." The words settled like stones in the small space of the SUV. Ethan's jaw clenched as he drove, but he forced his voice steady. "Snake Mercer runs his game out of the saloon on Water Street, doesn't he?" Claire nodded faintly. "Yes, everyone knows. The sheriff before you, he turned a blind eye. People are too afraid to talk." Axel let out a quiet rumble, a growl that faded into silence again, as if the dog sensed the weight of Snake's name. By the time they reached the police station, Claire's shivers had worsened. Ethan parked and hurried her inside, past the glass doors fogged with condensation. Riverbend's station was small, a single-floor brick building with 2 holding cells, a dispatch office, and a break room with a perpetually flickering light. It was warm inside, though the scent of stale coffee clung to the air. Deputy Carla Jennings, a woman in her late 20s with auburn hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, looked up from her desk. She wore the standard Navy deputy's jacket, her badge polished bright, though the exhaustion of long shifts was evident in the shadows under her eyes. She started to rise when she saw Ethan carrying Claire. "Good Lord, what happened?" Carla asked, rushing forward. "Domestic assault," Ethan said curtly. "But it's bigger than that. Get a medic kit and call County Hospital, tell them we're bringing her in after she warms up, and keep this. Quiet. I don't want Mercer hearing. We've got a witness." Carla's eyes widened slightly at the name, but she nodded, hurrying off. Ethan led Claire into an office, settled her into a chair, and poured her a cup of hot water from the station kettle. Axel sat at the door, ears erect, sentinel-like. Claire's hands still shook as she lifted the cup. "I didn't think anyone would come," she whispered. "I thought I'd die out there." Ethan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You're alive, Claire. But I need everything you can give me, names, places, anything that ties Derek and Mercer together." Her gaze dropped, and for a long moment she seemed torn between fear and resolve. Finally she said, "Derek isn't just a gambler. He lures others in. Snake uses him to bring new players to the tables. He takes his cut, and when they lose, Snake owns them. It's not just cards. I've heard them talk about guns, shipments, things hidden in those warehouses by the river." Ethan listened, filing away every word. Claire Donovan wasn't just a victim, she was a link to the core of Riverbend's rot. Outside, snow continued to fall heavy over the small town, blanketing its sins in white, and in the alleys near Water Street, another story was unfolding. Tommy Briggs was 12 years old, a wiry boy with wind-burned cheeks and a mop of brown hair that stuck out under his threadbare wool cap. He came from a working-class family that lived above the bakery on Elm Street, his father gone years ago and his mother taking shifts at the diner to keep food on the table. Tommy sold newspapers in the evenings, hustling through the bars and saloons where men drank away their wages. His jacket was second-hand, sleeves frayed at the cuffs, but he wore it with pride, determined to do his part. That night, as he cut through the alley behind Mercer's saloon, something caught his eye, a dark bundle lying in the snow, half hidden near the trash barrels. He crouched down, frowning, and tugged at the canvas wrapping. What spilled out made his breath hitch. Stacks of bills, damp but unmistakably real, bound together with twine. The money was stained in places, smeared with something dark. Blood, he realized with a shudder. Tommy looked around quickly. The alley was empty, though laughter and the clink of glasses drifted from the saloon's back door. He hesitated only a second before stuffing the bundle into his satchel, heart pounding. He didn't know why the money was there, or whose it was, but he knew one thing. If Mercer's men found it missing, they'd come looking. Still, the thought of what it could mean for his family, food, rent, maybe even saving for school, overpowered his fear. "Don't be stupid," he muttered to himself, adjusting the satchel strap. "Hide it first. Think later." He hurried down the alley, boots slipping on the ice, unaware that the choice he had just made would ripple across Riverbend in ways he couldn't imagine. Back at the station, Ethan rose to his feet as Claire finished her water. "We'll keep you here for the night until we can move you safely. Axel will stay close." The shepherd wagged his tail once as if affirming the decision. Claire's eyes softened at the dog's steady presence. "He knew, didn't he? Out there in the snow, he knew I was there." Ethan allowed himself the faintest smile. "He always knows?" But as he looked at Claire, at the bruises that told a story of betrayal, at the fear that whispered of darker powers pulling strings, Ethan Rowley knew Riverbend's calm surface had cracked wide open. And somewhere, in the shadows of the town, Snake Mercer would already be plotting his next move. The clock on the station wall ticked steadily toward midnight, the kind of hour when Riverbend fell silent beneath its blanket of snow, but inside Ethan Rowley's office, the air felt thick with unease. Ethan sat across from Claire Donovan, his storm-gray eyes studying her with a mixture of concern and scrutiny. She looked small, wrapped in the station's gray wool blanket, her dark hair hanging loose around her pale face. The bruises on her wrists were angry marks, and her voice trembled as though every word cost her effort. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the desk, Axel stretched out by his feet. The shepherd's nose twitched as he shifted suddenly, lifting his head to sniff at Claire's coat, which lay draped over the chair beside her. Ethan frowned, following the dog's behavior. Axel growled low, pressing his muzzle closer to the fabric. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked softly, reaching over to inspect. His gloved fingers brushed against a dark stain hidden near the torn sleeve. The blood had dried, faint but distinct. Claire stiffened. That's not from tonight." Ethan's tone sharpened. "Then where is it from?" Her gaze darted downward, shame and fear battling across her face. "Snake doesn't just run cards and dice. Derek told me he moves more than money. Guns, sometimes. Other things I didn't want to know. They keep people in the warehouses by the river. Not everyone comes out. Derek would laugh when he said it. I tried not to listen, but—" She shuddered. "They tied me up there once before they dragged me out to the tracks. That blood isn't mine. Someone else was hurt in that place." Ethan sat back, absorbing the weight of her words. The warehouse district had been half abandoned for years, but he had always suspected it served a darker purpose. Now he had a victim confirming it. He glanced down at Axel, who was staring at Claire's coat as if daring the fabric itself to reveal more secrets. "You're saying Snake's running more than a gambling racket?" Ethan said evenly. "You're saying he's trafficking weapons, maybe even people, and your husband's part of it." Claire nodded, tears threatening but refusing to fall. "Yes, Derek doesn't care who gets hurt, as long as he can keep playing cards. I begged him to stop. He said Snake would kill us both if he did." Ethan's jaw tightened, and he scribbled notes into a small, leather-bound pad. Every detail mattered. Claire's story wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about exposing the rot choking Riverbend from within. While the storm raged outside and Ethan pressed for more details, another kind of storm gathered elsewhere in town. Tommy Briggs crouched on the floor of the cramped apartment above Riverbend Bakery, his satchel spread open before him. The bundle of blood-stained bills lay inside, glowing in the dim lamplight like a forbidden treasure. Tommy's fingers brushed the edges reverently, the way a child might touch something holy. His heart beat fast with excitement and fear. Behind him, a voice cut through his thrill. "Where did you get that?" Tommy spun around to see his sister, Lucy Briggs, standing in the doorway. Lucy was 17, tall and wiry like her brother, but with the stern posture of someone forced to grow up too soon. Her blonde hair was tied back with a faded ribbon, and she wore a threadbare dress layered with her mother's old cardigan. She worked mornings at the bakery downstairs, scrubbing pans and sweeping floors before school, though lately she'd been skipping classes more often than not to cover shifts when their mother was too tired from the diner. Tommy scrambled to close the satchel, but Lucy had already stepped inside, her eyes wide. "Tommy, is that money?" His voice faltered. "I found it, in the alley behind the saloon." Lucy froze, her expression draining from surprise to dread. "You idiot!" she whispered harshly, rushing forward to grab his arm. "That's Mercer's place. You think he won't notice if a bag of cash disappears? If his men find out you took it—" "But we need it!" Tommy shot back, clutching the satchel tighter. "Ma's behind on rent again, and you said you couldn't pay for school books. This could change everything." Lucy's hands trembled as she pulled away. "This isn't free money, Tommy. It's blood money. Look at it. It's stained. Someone got hurt for this. You think we can just use it and walk away?" Her voice cracked at the edges. She had seen enough of Riverbend's shadows to know Mercer's reach stretched far. "If Mercer even suspects you, he'll come after you. After us. You have to hide it. Better yet, you have to get rid of it." But Tommy shook his head stubbornly. "I'm not throwing it away, not when it could save us. We just have to be smart." Lucy pressed a hand to her forehead, frustration and fear twisting inside her. She loved her brother fiercely, but she knew his reckless hope could get them both killed. She looked at the satchel again, the bills like coiled snakes ready to strike. Outside, the wind howled against the window panes, rattling them in their frame. Lucy glanced out at the snowstorm, her stomach sinking. Somewhere, in Riverbend, Snake Mercer's men were already searching, and sooner or later, the trail would lead to them. Back at the station, Ethan handed Claire a cup of coffee, watching her cradle it between her hands. Her story deepened with each question. Derek had connections in town, dealers, debtors, even names of men in uniforms who looked the other way. Ethan scribbled everything down, each revelation fueling his resolve. Axel shifted closer to Claire's chair, tail tapping softly against the floor as if to reassure her. When Claire finally fell silent, exhaustion pulling her eyelids heavy, Ethan rose quietly. He draped another blanket over her shoulders and glanced at Tosh. "Axel." The shepherd tilted his head, eyes glinting with canine wisdom, and Ethan whispered, "We've got work ahead, partner." Riverbend's darkness was no longer rumor or suspicion. It was fact. And as the night dragged on, Ethan Rowley knew the town he swore to protect was on the edge of something far larger than he had ever faced. The storm had calmed by morning, leaving Riverbend blanketed in a brittle silence, the streets piled high with white that gleamed under a dim sun. Ethan Rowley tugged on his gloves and pulled his patrol jacket tighter as he stepped out of the station, Axel bounding at his side, breath puffing in white clouds. Behind them, Claire Donovan remained inside under Deputy Carla's care, too weak to move much but finally warm and safe enough to sleep. Ethan had promised her answers, and promises were things he didn't break. He held Claire's torn coat in his hand, the dried bloodstain Axel had discovered the night before now their only tangible lead. Ethan crouched, lowering the fabric to Axel's nose. The German shepherd's ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring as he inhaled the scent. His tail stiffened, body coiling with sudden purpose. Ethan gave a single nod. "Find it, boy." They moved quickly through Riverbend's back streets, past shuttered storefronts and half-buried wagons, until Axel tugged them down a narrow lane that ended at the frozen edge of the river. The warehouses that lined the water had been built decades ago to store lumber and grain, but were long since abandoned, at least officially. Their brick walls leaned, black with rot and graffiti, but to Ethan they had always looked too alive in the wrong ways. Axel stopped suddenly at the largest warehouse, nose pressed to the rusted side door. The lock was cheap, replaced hastily. Ethan's stomach tightened. He drew his sidearm, pushing the door open slowly. It creaked, metal scraping metal, and the cold darkness inside seemed to exhale. The air smelled of mildew, sweat, and something sharper, iron, maybe blood. Dust clung to the beams overhead, but the floor told another story. The faint outlines of footprints pressed into the grime, some recent, others older, weaving in and out of the space. Axel moved ahead, claws clicking against the wooden planks, his nose darting from one scent to the next. Then he stopped, barked sharply, and pawed at a corner. Ethan hurried over, his flashlight beam cutting across the wall. There, dried into the floorboards, was a dark pool, the stain spreading outward in jagged shapes. Blood. Ethan crouched, brushing his gloved hand close but not touching. It hadn't been there long. Beside it, he noticed an overturned chair and a length of rope frayed at the ends. Whoever had been held here hadn't gone quietly. His gut twisted. Claire hadn't been the only one. Axel barked again, this time near a rickety table in the center of the room. Playing cards and poker chips lay scattered across it, abandoned mid-game, as if someone had left in a hurry. A glass still stood half full, frozen over at the top. Ethan scanned the scene, mind working quickly. This place wasn't just a holding cell. It was where Snake mixed his vices, gambling and punishment under the same roof. He snapped photos with his phone, documenting everything, but the gnawing weight in his chest grew heavier. Evidence was important, but Snake's shadow stretched wider than photographs could prove. Ethan knew this was just the beginning. Across town, Snake Mercer sat in his private booth at the saloon, cigarette smoke curling above him like a crown. He had traded his tailored vest for a dark wool coat, though the gold chain of his watch glinted as bright as ever against the lamplight. At 45, his face was cut with the hard lines of a man who smiled rarely but threatened often. His scar tugged upward when he grinned, making his charm unsettling rather than warm. One of his lieutenants, a thick-set man in his 30s named Roy Danner, approached the booth. Roy had a shaved head, a crooked nose broken long ago, and wore a leather jacket still dusted with snow. He had grown up on the wrong side of Riverbend, hustling pool halls and fixing fights until Snake found him useful. Roy leaned close, voice low. "Boss, we got a problem. One of the bags, gone. We checked everywhere. Must have been dropped in the alley last night and picked up." Snake's hand stilled around his glass of whiskey. "How much?" "Couple $1,000, Roy muttered. "Blood-marked. Won't be hard to trace." Snake's eyes narrowed, pale blue and cold as river ice. "Find it. Someone out there thinks they're lucky. Teach them that luck runs dry." Roy nodded quickly, but Snake wasn't finished. "Start with the kids. Street rats sniff around where they shouldn't. If one of them's dumb enough to think Mercer's money is charity—" His grin curved sharp. "Make sure the lesson sticks." Roy left, already pulling on gloves. Outside, the snow still fell in light flurries, soft enough to hide footprints, cruel enough to erase innocence. In a small apartment above the bakery, Tommy Briggs sat cross-legged on the floor with the satchel open before him, counting the bills again with wide eyes. His fingers fumbled, clumsy with excitement. He imagined handing some to his mother so she could rest from endless shifts, or giving Lucy money for new shoes instead of the patched pair she wore. Lucy Briggs stood near the window, arms crossed tight over her chest. 17, responsible to a fault, she had always been the one to shield Tommy from the worst of their hardships. Tonight her face was pale, framed by the dim lamplight, her expression carved with worry. "Tommy, I told you, it's not safe. That money isn't ours. It belongs to men who kill without thinking." Her voice cracked, but she steadied it. "You need to put it back before they come looking." Tommy's jaw set stubbornly. "They won't know it was me. I found it fair and square. We can hide it, please, Lucy. This is our chance." Lucy turned from the window, her eyes glistening with a mixture of anger and fear. "You don't understand. Men like Mercer don't forgive. If he even smells you had this, he'll come for you. For both. Of us." At that moment, footsteps echoed faintly on the street below, heavy boots crunching snow. Lucy froze, peering through the frosted glass. Two men in dark coats moved slowly along the sidewalk, eyes scanning the storefronts, their movements deliberate. She recognized one. Roy Danner, Mercer's enforcer. Her breath caught. "They're looking already." Tommy shoved the satchel under his mattress, panic finally creeping into his voice. "We didn't do anything wrong." Lucy grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "We have to be smarter than them, Tommy. Promise me you'll stay quiet about this. No bragging to anyone. Not at school, not to your friends. Promise." Reluctantly, Tommy nodded, though the gleam of temptation hadn't left his eyes. Lucy pressed a trembling hand to her temple. The Briggs children had survived poverty and loneliness, but this was something darker, and she feared it would swallow them whole. Back at the warehouse, Ethan holstered his weapon and looked down at Axel, who was still alert, nose twitching as if he could feel the ghosts of what had happened there. Ethan placed a hand on the shepherd's back. "Good work, boy. You found something no one else could." Axel barked once, sharp and certain, echoing through the hollow space. To Ethan, it sounded like both a warning and a promise. Snow whirled past the frosted windows of the Riverbend station, coating the streets in a quiet veil that belied the roiling tension within. Inside the office, Claire Donovan sat at the small metal table, her fingers laced together, knuckles pale against the wool blanket draped over her shoulders. The harsh fluorescent lights above made her bruises stand out darker, reminders of the nights she had survived. Across from her sat Ethan Rowley, arms folded, storm-gray eyes locked on her as though weighing every word. At his feet, Axel lay poised, the black and tan shepherd lifting his head each time Claire hesitated, his amber eyes watching her with an intelligence that unnerved even her. Claire's voice was steady but quiet. "You think Derek only left me because he owed Snake money, but it's worse. He was never just a victim." Her gaze dropped, shame etched deep. "He worked for Snake. Derek would tell people about the games, invite them. Ordinary men, mechanics, shopkeepers, farmhands. He made them feel like they had a chance to win. Once they sat down at Snake's table, they never walked away free again." Ethan clenched his jaw, his hands curling into fists. "So your husband was recruiting townsfolk for Mercer's racket?" Claire nodded faintly. "He said it was easy. Men wanted to believe in luck, and Snake gave them just enough to get them hooked. Derek took his cut each time someone lost more than they could pay." Her voice faltered. "I begged him to stop. He laughed, said I was too soft to understand, said no one in Riverbend was innocent." Axel rose suddenly, ears pricking, tail stiff. He gave a low growl directed at Claire, his body tense. Ethan reached down, his hand resting gently on the dog's collar. "Easy, boy." He studied Axel's reaction with grim understanding. The shepherd had never taken well to the mention of Derek Donovan. It was as if even the sound of that name carried the scent of betrayal. Ethan leaned closer, his voice like steel. "If Snake is rotting this town from the inside, then I'm done waiting for backup that never comes. We'll dismantle him piece by piece. I swear it." His oath hung heavy in the room, carried by the weight of a man tired of seeing his town drown in silence. Claire looked at him with a mix of fear and fragile hope. "You'll need more than just your badge, Ethan. Snake has friends in high places, men who wear suits by day and bet their souls by night." Ethan said nothing more, but Axel barked once, sharp and certain, as if declaring allegiance to the fight. Meanwhile, in the cramped apartment above the bakery, Lucy Briggs pulled on her threadbare coat and wrapped a scarf tight around her neck. She was 17, but hardship had carved lines of responsibility into her expression that belonged to someone twice her age. Her younger brother, Tommy, slept in the corner bed, one hand curled around the satchel hidden beneath the mattress, dreaming, perhaps of freedom that money could buy. Lucy's eyes lingered on him with both love and exasperation. She moved quietly through the dim room, slipping a notebook and pencil into her pocket. If Snake Mercer's men were hunting for the stolen money, she couldn't let Tommy stumble into the crosshairs blindly. She had resolved to find out how deep Snake's grip on Riverbend ran, and maybe, just maybe, she could figure a way to free her brother before it was too late. Her first stop was the back alley near Water Street, where she had seen Snake's men lingering before. The alley reeked of tobacco and stale whiskey, its walls smeared with faded graffiti and the ghosts of old posters. She crouched by a stack of crates, scribbling down details. Who went in, who left, and when. She spotted a dealer she recognized, a lanky man with slicked hair who used to sell newspapers like Tommy before Snake gave him better work. Her stomach twisted, but Lucy was not as invisible as she believed. Across the street, two of Snake's men leaned in the shadows. One was Roy Danner, the heavy-set enforcer with a broken nose who wore a dark leather jacket over flannel. The other was a thinner man, mid-30s, with a jagged scar running along his cheek. His name was Alvis Kane, a drifter who had once worked the mines before drifting into Mercer's orbit. His wiry build and narrow eyes gave him the look of a predator always searching for weakness. Roy lit a cigarette, his gaze never leaving Lucy. "That's the Briggs girl," he muttered to Alvis. Alvis smirked, tilting his head. "She's sniffing too close. Snake'll want to know why." Lucy felt a prickle at the back of her neck but forced herself to stay still, to keep writing. She had no idea the two men were already discussing her fate. Back at the station, Ethan called in Deputy Carla Jennings. Carla carried a notepad, her auburn hair falling loose now from its bun, fatigue in her eyes but determination in her stance. She had been with the department only 4 years, but in that time she had learned Riverbend was less a town of laws and more a place of compromises. Still, she trusted Ethan. "What's the plan?" she asked, glancing at Claire, who sat silent but listening. Ethan tapped his knuckle against the blood-stained coat on the desk. "We've got Snake tied to the warehouses, to the gambling, maybe worse. Claire's testimony backs it, but it's not enough. We need undeniable proof, ledgers, names, shipments, something that can't be buried by crooked officials." Carla hesitated, biting her lip. "You're talking about going straight into Mercer's territory." Ethan's eyes hardened. "I'm talking about ending this before another person ends up chained in the snow." Axel whined softly, pressing his muzzle against Ethan's knee as if echoing the resolve. Claire sat straighter, her fear temporarily eclipsed by the thought of Snake finally falling. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Riverbend in deceptive quiet, while in the shadows, Snake's men marked Lucy Briggs as their next quarry. The saloon on Water Street glowed like a furnace in the heart of Riverbend's frozen night. Yellow lamplight spilled from its windows onto the snow-dusted sidewalks, a deceptive warmth hiding the rot festering within. Laughter rolled through the doors, mingling with the clatter of dice and the shuffle of cards. The air smelled of whiskey, smoke, and desperation, a scent Snake Mercer had cultivated like perfume. Ethan Rowley pulled his scarf higher round his face as he paused on the opposite side of the street. He wore an old brown coat and a battered felt hat borrowed from the station's evidence locker, clothes meant to disguise his usual crisp patrol uniform. Beside him, Claire Donovan adjusted the shawl wrapped over her hair. Her bruises were fading but not gone, and the shadows under her eyes gave her an anonymity she hadn't asked for. She carried herself with forced composure, though her hands trembled inside the sleeves of her wool coat. "You don't have to come in," Ethan murmured. Claire shook her head. "I know these people. Derek took me here before. If they see you alone, you'll look like a stranger. With me, you'll blend in." Ethan studied her for a moment, then gave a tight nod. At his feet, Axel whined softly, his breath steaming in the cold. Ethan knelt, scratching the shepherd behind the ears. "Stay here, boy. Watch the door." Axel sat back on his haunches, amber eyes fixed on the entrance as if understanding the order was both duty and warning. Inside, the Riverbend saloon was alive with noise and shadows. A haze of cigar smoke hung thick under the rafters. The clink of glasses mixed with bursts of raucous laughter. though beneath the surface buzz, Ethan felt the tension coiled like a snake. Men crowded around the green felt tables, chips stacked high, whiskey spilling as fortunes shifted hand to hand. Ethan guided Claire toward a quieter corner. He kept his head lowered, letting the brim of the hat shield his eyes, though his attention never strayed from the room. And then he saw them, faces he recognized, faces that should have had no place here. At the farthest table, in the warmest light, sat several town officials. Among them, Alden Briggs, the deputy mayor of Riverbend, a man in his 50s with thinning blonde hair and a mustache trimmed too neatly for a town drowning in poverty. He wore a tailored suit, his tie loosened as he leaned over his cards. Next to him was Harold Ellis, the town's clerk, a balding man known for preaching morality at Sunday services. Both laughed with Snake Mercer himself, who leaned back in his chair with an easy grin, his scar tugging at the corner of his mouth. Claire's hand gripped Ethan's sleeve. "That's him. That's Snake." Ethan kept his voice low. "I know." Snake's pale eyes scanned the room briefly, predatory even when smiling. Ethan felt the man's gaze brush over him, lingering just long enough to make his pulse quicken before shifting. Away. It was a reminder. In this place, nothing escaped Snake's notice. Ethan nursed a glass of watered-down whiskey, listening, watching. He caught fragments of conversation, shipments delayed by weather, debts collected, names of men ruined by the tables. He scribbled details into his memory, each word a nail in Snake's coffin. But he also saw something else, the complicity of the town's leaders. The deputy mayor laughing as chips slid across the table, the clerk hiding his trembling hands behind a glass, men sworn to serve Riverbend drowning themselves in Snake's poison. It made Ethan's stomach churn with anger. Across town, in the dark of an abandoned warehouse by the river, Lucy Briggs sat bound to a chair, ropes cutting into her wrists. The cold gnawed at her bones, her breath puffing in shallow clouds. The same corner where Claire Donovan had once been tied now held Lucy, the boards beneath her stained by old blood. Roy Danner leaned against a beam, arms crossed, his cigarette glowing in the shadows. Beside him, Alvis Kane paced slowly, his boots crunching on the wooden floor. "She's just a kid," Roy muttered, smoke curling from his lips. Alvis sneered. "Kid or not, she was watching the saloon. Snake wants to know why. You want to argue with him?" Roy said nothing, flicking ash to the ground. His gaze lingered on Lucy, who met his eyes with defiance despite the fear tightening her chest. "You think scaring me will fix what you are?" she whispered. Alvis chuckled. "Brave little rat. Maybe Snake will decide you're worth more than we think." He leaned closer, the scar on his cheek twisting when he smiled. Lucy turned her face away, refusing to give him satisfaction. At the Briggs apartment, Tommy woke to find Lucy gone. Panic clawed at him as he searched the room, finding only her empty scarf on the chair. His satchel still lay hidden under the mattress, but the sight of it filled him with dread rather than excitement. He bolted down the stairs and out into the snow, breath burning in his lungs as he raced through the streets. His feet carried him toward the station, toward safety, but when he arrived, the front desk was empty. Deputy Carla had gone to check on hospital transport for Claire. Tommy's small fists pounded against the locked door. "Help! Please!" A sudden bark made him freeze. Axel stood at the corner of the street, ears pricked, tail stiff. The shepherd trotted toward Tommy, nudging his leg with a wet nose, then turned back toward Water Street, glancing over his shoulder as if beckoning. Tommy's heart hammered. "You know where she is, don't you?" Axel barked once, sharp and certain, before bounding ahead. Tommy ran after him, slipping in the snow, the boy and the dog disappearing into the Riverbend night together. Back in the saloon, Ethan noticed Claire's tension growing with each passing moment. Her eyes flicked nervously toward the back hallway where men carried crates through a side door. "That's how they move things," she whispered. "The game's cover for the shipments." Ethan took another sip from his glass, mind racing. Evidence was here, plain and heavy, But his badge meant little if the law itself was sitting at Snake's table. Then, faint but unmistakable, came a sound that only he seemed to notice. A bark from outside. Axel's call. Ethan stiffened, glancing toward the door. Axel never broke orders without cause. Something had gone wrong. He rose, murmuring to Claire, "Stay close." She nodded, wrapping her shawl tighter, her eyes following Snake with a loathing as they slipped toward the exit. Outside, the storm had settled into a steady fall of snowflakes that clung to Ethan's coat. And waiting just beyond the lamplight was Axel, panting hard, his eyes urgent. Tommy stood beside him, cheeks red from running, breath ragged. "They took Lucy!" Tommy gasped. "Snake's men! Axel! He found me! He says he can find her too!" Ethan placed a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder, then glanced down at Axel. The shepherd's ears were sharp, his stance tense with direction. Ethan felt the pieces snapping together. The warehouse, the officials, the missing girl. Snake Mercer's grip was closing around Riverbend, but with Axel leading the way, Ethan knew they still had a chance to tear it apart. The night pressed down on Riverbend like a predator, the cold air sharp enough to bite at exposed skin. Snow muffled the sound of Ethan Rowley's boots as he moved quickly along the river path, his breath heavy clouds that dissolved into the dark. Axel padded at his side, the shepherd's ears stiff, nose lifted to the wind, pulling forward with instinctual urgency. Behind them, Tommy Briggs struggled to keep up, his legs short and clumsy, his chest burning with every step. "Stay behind me, kid," Ethan muttered without looking back. "No matter what you see, you stay low." Tommy nodded, his face pale, the fear of his missing sister pushing him forward despite exhaustion. His wool cap was too big for his head, slipping down over his brow, and his patched coat flapped against the wind. The warehouse loomed ahead, its hulking shape outlined against the dim moonlight. The same place Ethan and Axel had discovered days before now pulsed with hidden life. Lanterns glowed faintly through cracks in the boarded windows, and the faint murmur of voices carried through the night air. Ethan crouched low, pulling Tommy beside him behind a stack of barrels. Axel pressed forward, body rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Ethan reached down to steady the dog, whispering, "Not yet, partner. Wait for my word." Inside the warehouse, Lucy Briggs sat bound to the same chair where Claire once endured her torment. Her lips were blue from the cold, but her eyes burned with stubborn defiance. Roy Danner leaned in the corner, arms folded, cigarette dangling from his lips. Across from him paced Alvis Kane, his scar catching the lantern light as he smirked at Lucy's silence. Near the far wall, half hidden in shadow, stood Derek Donovan. He was 35, his frame gaunt and jittery, dressed in a wrinkled shirt and coat that smelled of smoke and sweat. His eyes darted nervously from side to side, never settling long on Lucy. He wasn't here as a protector. He was here as proof of betrayal. "Snake's not gonna like waiting," Alvis said, kicking at the leg of Lucy's chair. "The boss wants answers. Who sent you sniffing around, girl?" Lucy pressed her lips together, refusing to respond. Alvis chuckled. "Stubborn. You'll learn." Roy exhaled smoke slowly, his gaze uneasy. "She's just a kid, Alvis. Snake doesn't need blood on his hands for this." Alvis sneered. "Snake decides who bleeds, not you." Before Roy could respond, the door at the far end of the warehouse creaked open. Ethan slipped inside, pistol raised, Axel slinking at his heel like a shadow. Tommy hovered at the threshold, eyes wide. The silence shattered with Ethan's command. "Hands where I can see them." Roy stiffened, the cigarette falling from his lips. Alvis snarled, reaching for the revolver at his hip, but Axel lunged before the gun cleared its holster. The shepherd hit Alvis square in the chest, teeth flashing, dragging him down hard. Alvis's weapon clattered across the boards as Axel snarled, jaws clamped onto the man's arm, refusing to release. Gunfire erupted. Roy drew, firing wildly as Ethan ducked behind a support beam, returning fire with controlled precision. Bullets splintered wood, the echo thunderous inside the confined space. Tommy cowered in the doorway, covering his ears, heart hammering against his ribs. Lucy screamed as a stray round struck the wall inches from her head. Ethan darted forward, tackling Roy to the ground. The struggle was brutal, fists and elbows trading in the dark, but Ethan's training won. He wrenched the revolver free and slammed the butt into Roy's temple, leaving the enforcer sprawled unconscious. Meanwhile, Axel dragged Alvis across the boards, pinning him against the wall. Alvis howled in pain, kicking desperately, but the dog's weight and fury held him fast. Ethan spared a glance, nodded sharply. "Good boy." Then he saw him, Derek Donovan, standing frozen near the crates, pistol in trembling hands. His face was pale, eyes wide with panic. "Don't shoot!" Derek cried, the weapon shaking so badly he could hardly aim. "I didn't want this, I owed Snake everything. He said if I gave him Claire, he'd wipe it clean. I didn't have a choice." Ethan's jaw clenched, rage boiling up at the confession. He took a step closer, gun steady. "You handed your wife to a monster to pay off cards? You call that no choice?" Derek shook his head violently, tears streaking his face. "You don't understand. Snake would have killed me. I thought he'd spare her." "Spare her?" Ethan's voice thundered. "You left her chained in the snow to die." Tommy peeked around the doorway, hearing every word. His young mind, until now clouded by dreams of easy money, finally saw the truth. The gambling dens, the whispered debts, the violence. He saw it all for what it was: ruin. His stomach twisted with sick realization. Lucy's voice cut through the chaos. "Ethan!" Ethan turned, rushing to her side. He sliced through the ropes with his knife, pulling her into freedom. She collapsed against him, shivering but alive. Axel released Alvis at Ethan's command, the man groaning, his arm shredded and bleeding. With Lucy safe, Ethan turned his full attention back to Derek. The man had dropped his gun, sinking to his knees, his sobs echoing in the cold warehouse. Ethan cuffed him with steady hands, ignoring his protests. "You made your choices, Derek," Ethan said coldly. "Now you'll answer for them." Tommy stepped forward timidly, his voice barely a whisper. This is what Snake does, isn't it? All of it? The money, the games? It's all just chains." Ethan looked at the boy, then at Lucy, trembling in his arms. He nodded once, grim but resolute. "Yes, Tommy. And tonight you saw the truth of it." The warehouse smelled of gunpowder and blood, the silence heavy after the storm of violence. Snowflakes drifted in through the broken windows, settling on the fallen men. Ethan knew this was only the first step in the war against Snake Mercer, but for now, one thing mattered most. Lucy Briggs was safe. The warehouse smelled of cold ash and gunpowder, the echoes of the midnight fight still clinging to its walls. Ethan Rowley stood over Derek Donovan, the man's wrists bound tight in handcuffs, his face streaked with sweat and shame. Lucy Briggs huddled close to her brother Tommy, still trembling from her ordeal, while Axel paced the floor, ears pricked, hackles raised, as though danger lingered in the corners that light could not reach. Derek's eyes darted nervously, his voice cracking under the weight of silence. "You don't understand, Ethan. Snake doesn't just run cards. He's planning something bigger, something that'll bury this whole town if you let it happen." Ethan crouched low, his storm-gray eyes locking onto Derek's. "Then talk, and for your sake, talk straight." Derek swallowed hard, his thin frame trembling. "There's a shipment. Weapons, rifles, handguns, crates of ammunition. He's moving them through the old rail line tomorrow night. The warehouse near the south tracks. It's the staging ground. He uses the gambling halls as a front, but it's the trains that make him money now. That's why he needed me to bring in more players, distraction, noise to cover what he was moving." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I only did it because he promised I'd live. But Claire, I didn't know he'd—" "Shut up!" Ethan's voice was sharp, cutting off the half-hearted excuse. With one hand, he reached into his coat and clicked a small digital recorder on, the red light blinking as Derek's words continued to spill. Every confession was evidence, every syllable a nail in Snake Mercer's coffin. Claire Donovan, standing near the door, froze at the sound of Derek's voice. Her face, pale and rigid, betrayed nothing, but her fingers dug into the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She had heard enough to confirm what she already knew. Derek had chosen his own skin over her life. Axel sniffed the air suddenly, nose pressed to the ground. The shepherd padded toward a stack of wooden crates half hidden beneath a tarp. His claws scratched lightly against the wood as he pawed, then barked sharply. Ethan rose, drawing closer, flashlight beam cutting through dust. He pulled the tarp back, and the sight made his chest tighten. Rows of wooden cases, stenciled with faded military markings, sat neatly stacked. Some bore the numbers of calibers. Others were sealed tight, the metal clasps rusting but firm. Ethan pried one open with the tip of his knife, the lid groaning as it gave way. Inside lay rows of rifles, oiled and waiting, their barrels gleaming faintly. "God damn," Ethan muttered, exhaling sharply. He glanced at Derek. "This is your idea of survival?" Derek shook his head wildly. "It wasn't my choice. Snake controls everything. You think I could have said no?" Ethan ignored him, instead focusing on Axel, who wagged his tail once, proud of the find. The shepherd had done what no deputy could, uncovered proof solid enough to drag Snake into the light. Across town, the saloon's warmth had curdled into something darker. Snake Mercer sat at his usual table, his pale blue eyes cold and sharp as glass. Around him, his men shifted uneasily, each one aware of the weight in his silence. Roy Danner stood nearby, head bowed, his temple bruised from Ethan's blow. Alvis Kane's arm was wrapped in a bloodied bandage, his face twisted with anger. Both had failed to secure the Briggs girl, and Snake's patience was running thin. "You disappoint me," Snake said finally, his voice low but carrying the weight of a blade. "First the money, then the girl, now whispers of the law sniffing around my warehouses. Tell me, which one of you is feeding Rowley scraps?" The room stilled. Men glanced at each other, suspicion of poison creeping between them. Alvis snarled. "Wasn't me. Roy's the one who—" Roy shot back. "You shut your mouth. You're the one bleeding from a dog bite. Maybe you let him in." Snake smiled faintly, his scar tugging upward. "I don't care who it was. I'll find out. And when I do, I'll cut the rot out before it spreads." He leaned back in his chair, lighting a cigarette with a deliberate calm. "Until then, no one leaves Riverbend. You breathe wrong, you answer to me." The men shifted nervously. Outside the saloon, snow fell steady, muffling the streets, while inside distrust thickened the air. Snake had planted his poison well. His men would devour themselves before long. Back at the warehouse, Ethan loaded evidence into the SUV, his mind racing. Lucy sat wrapped in Tommy's coat, her head resting on his shoulder as the boy tried to hide his fear behind shaky resolve. Claire stood apart, her eyes never leaving Derek, who sat cuffed in the corner like a broken shadow of a man. "Sheriff," Carla Jennings's voice crackled over the radio. She had returned to the station after escorting hospital staff to Claire earlier, but now urgency bled through her tone. "We're picking up movement downtown. Snake's boys are tearing into each other. Shots fired near the saloon. Might be the purge you were waiting for." Ethan clicked the mic. "Keep eyes on it. Don't engage yet. We may have a window." He looked out over the river, snow swirling in faint patterns across its frozen surface. Snake Mercer's empire was cracking under its own weight, paranoia turning his men into enemies of each other. And Ethan Rowley, with Axel by his side, intended to use that chaos to strike where it hurt most. "Tomorrow night," Ethan muttered, staring down at the crates of weapons. "We finish this." Axel barked once, the sound sharp and resolute, as though agreeing with every word. The snow fell harder by the hour, swirling in angry sheets that turned the abandoned rail yard into a frozen battleground waiting for blood. Rusted tracks stretched into the dark, half buried beneath drifts, while the hulking shadows of old freight cars lined the yard like sleeping giants. Lanterns glowed faintly near the central platform, casting jittering light over crates stacked 2 stories high. The crates, Ethan Rowley knew, weren't filled with grain or coal. They were weapons, enough firepower to flood Riverbend with chaos. Ethan crouched behind a derelict engine, his breath fogging in the bitter night air. Beside him, Axel crouched low, ears sharp, the shepherd's gaze locked on the figures moving near the platform. Claire Donovan huddled close, wrapped in a dark cloak that blurred her outline against the storm. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with steady resolve. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was fighting. Behind them, Deputy Carla Jennings adjusted the strap of her rifle. Her auburn hair was tied back tight, her breath visible in quick bursts. Carla had gathered a small team of Riverbend deputies willing to take the risk. None wore clean uniforms tonight, only heavy coats and scarves that could pass as ordinary men to keep Snake's lookouts guessing. Still, their eyes betrayed nerves. Ethan's voice was low and commanding. "Remember, Snake isn't expecting the law tonight. He's expecting silence. We break that silence." He checked the pistol at his side, then nodded to Axel, who whined softly, muscles coiled for action. On the far side of the platform, Snake Mercer stood under the lamplight, his tailored coat buttoned against the cold. His scarred smile curved as he oversaw men loading crates into a waiting freight car. His pale eyes gleamed with hunger. Around him, armed thugs moved with practiced efficiency, rifles slung across their shoulders. Among them stood Derek Donovan, shoulders hunched, face gaunt. He looked less a man than a shadow of one, jittering like a puppet held on fraying strings. Snake exhaled a stream of smoke from his cigar, watching the crates disappear into the railcar. "Tomorrow, Riverbend belongs to me," he murmured. Derek nodded quickly, though his eyes betrayed fear. "You said I'd be free once the shipment's gone. That's the deal." Snake chuckled darkly. "You're free when I say you are, Donovan. Don't mistake breathing for freedom." The ambush began with Axel's bark. Sharp, echoing across the yard like the crack of a whip, it cut through the storm. Snake's men spun, weapons rising, just as Ethan's team surged from the shadows. "Police, drop your weapons!" Ethan's voice carried above the snow, resolute and commanding. Chaos erupted. Gunfire ripped across the yard, bullets striking sparks from metal rails. Deputies dove for cover, returning fire. Snake's men scattered behind crates, rifles snapping, the shout-out. Sound of war consumed the rail yard, echoing down the hollow line of tracks. Ethan sprinted between the stacks, Axel charging beside him. A thug leapt from behind a crate, revolver raised, but Axel hit him before the trigger pulled. The shepherd's jaws clamped down on the man's arm, forcing the gun free. Ethan finished it with a swift strike of his pistol, leaving the thug crumpled in the snow. Near the platform, Snake bellowed orders. "Hold the line! Don't let them near the crates!" His pale eyes blazed, but beneath the fury was something else. Fear. Claire moved cautiously behind the cover of a rail car, her gaze fixed on Derek. For a moment, their eyes met through the blizzard of violence. Derek froze, shame collapsing his shoulders. "Claire!" he shouted hoarsely, voice cracking through the storm. "You have to believe me. I never wanted this." Claire stepped forward, the storm tugging at her cloak. Her voice cut clean through the gunfire. "You handed me to him. You chained me in the snow. You don't get to ask for belief." Her words were not screamed. They were steady, resolute, final. Derek staggered, the truth of her rejection heavier than the cuffs Ethan soon snapped around his wrists. His protests died in his throat. Snake saw the moment and sneered. "Pathetic," he spat. "Even your own woman knows you're nothing?" Ethan shoved Derek aside, his pistol trained on Snake. "It's over, Mercer. You've lost." Snake's grin only widened. "This town is mine. Even if you drag me down, the rot is already inside your walls. But the chaos he had planted in his men was unraveling. Some broke, fleeing into the snow. Others turned their rifles on each other, suspicion from Snake's earlier paranoia boiling into violence. The empire he'd built with fear was crumbling before his eyes. Meanwhile, Tommy and Lucy Briggs stood inside the station, wrapped in blankets as they faced a different battlefield. In front of them sat Marcus Bell, a journalist in his 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and an overcoat still dusted with snow. He was tall, thin, with ink-stained fingers that betrayed years of writing stories towns tried to bury. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Marcus asked gently, pen poised over his notebook. Lucy straightened, her face pale but determined. "Snake owns too many people. If we don't tell what we saw, no one else will." Tommy clutched the satchel that had once held the blood-stained money. His voice trembled, but carried conviction. "We'll tell everything. About the money, the men, the officials who laughed at the tables." Marcus nodded, his gaze sharp behind the lenses. "Good. People need to hear this, and once it's in print, Snake's reach won't stretch far enough to smother it." The Briggs children had been victims of Riverbend's shadows, but now, in the warmth of the station, they became witnesses, voices that could not be silenced, back. At the rail yard, the gunfire began to fade, surrender replacing defiance. Snake Mercer stood surrounded, his pale eyes blazing with venom as Ethan closed in. Axel prowled at Ethan's side, teeth bared, fur bristling. Snowflakes clung to the shepherd's coat like shards of steel, making him look like a creature forged from winter itself. Ethan's voice was low but final. "You're done, Snake." Snake dropped his pistol at last, the sneer fading into a grimace as handcuffs clamped over his wrists. The rail yard, once his throne, now lay littered with his defeat. Axel barked once, the sound ringing clear and proud into the night, a declaration of victory in the heart of Riverbend's darkest winter. The first light of morning spilled across Riverbend, softening the sharp lines of a town that had endured too much shadow. Snow still clung to rooftops and rail lines, but the storm had passed, leaving a pale blue sky stretched wide over the valley. In the courthouse at the center of town the people gathered, farmers in heavy coats, merchants with tired faces, mothers clutching children close, all waiting to witness what few had dared believe possible. Snake Mercer stood before the judge, his tailored coat now replaced by a drab prison uniform. His scar, once a mark of fear, seemed smaller under the harsh lights of justice. His pale eyes flicked across the crowd, but the arrogance was gone, replaced with the cold fury of a man who had lost his kingdom. Beside him, Derek Donovan trembled in his shackles, thinner and more broken than ever, his gaunt face marked by sleepless nights. The presiding judge, Samuel Kavanaugh, was a man in his 60s with a full white beard and spectacles perched low on his nose. He had lived in Riverbend all his life, seen its golden years fade into corruption, and now sat with the gavel steady in his hand. His black robe carried the weight of decades of law, and when he spoke, the room stilled. "Franklin Mercer, known as Snake, you stand guilty of weapons trafficking, illegal gambling, bribery, and attempted murder. You have bled this town for years, twisting its leaders and terrorizing its people. Today, Riverbend takes back its name. You are sentenced to life imprisonment without parole." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Relief mingled with disbelief. Snake clenched his jaw but said nothing as deputies led him away. "Derek Donovan," the judge continued, "you are guilty of conspiracy, aiding and abetting, and the attempted murder of your wife. While your role was lesser, your betrayal was no less grave. You are sentenced to 25 years in state prison." Claire Donovan sat among the townsfolk, wrapped in a dark wool coat, her face calm but firm. She did not flinch at Derek's sentence, nor did she speak as he glanced toward her, pleading silently. Her silence was her answer, final and irrevocable. Weeks passed, and the scars of Riverbend began to heal. The saloon on Water Street was shuttered, its tables and dice gone, its doors chained shut. The warehouses along the river were cleared, weapons confiscated and shipped away under federal guard. The snow melted slowly, revealing streets that, for the first time in years, felt safe to walk. Claire found her place in the town again, though not as the fragile woman rescued from the snow. She walked into the office of the Riverbend Women's Association, a modest brick building with lace curtains and a pot of coffee always warm by the stove. Run by Margaret Holmes, a sturdy widow in her 50s with kind eyes and a sharp tongue, the association had long fought for better schooling and fair wages. Now, with Claire's help, they expanded their mission, offering shelter and aid to wives and mothers who had endured abuse in silence. Claire wore simple dresses and a knitted shawl, her hair tied back neatly as she organized food drives and spoke quietly with women who came seeking help. Each time she heard their stories, she saw shadows of herself, and each time she answered with a steady voice, "You're not alone anymore." Ethan Rowley and Axel were honored in a ceremony on the courthouse steps. A brass band played as townsfolk filled the square, their cheers echoing under the bright winter sun. Ethan stood tall in his Navy sheriff's uniform, the silver badge on his chest gleaming. His storm-gray eyes softened when children pressed close to pet Axel, who sat proudly at his side, tongue lolling happily as if he knew he was the star of the day. Mayor Charles Whitman, a balding man in his late 50s with a booming voice, read the proclamation. For bravery in the line of duty, for dismantling a criminal network, and for restoring honor to Riverbend, Sheriff Ethan Rowley and his canine partner Axel are hereby commended by the town. Applause thundered, and Ethan allowed himself a rare smile. He bent, scratching Axel's ears. "Couldn't have done it without you, partner." Axel barked once as if to agree, sending a ripple of laughter through the crowd. Children crowded closer, tugging at Ethan's coat, begging to hear more about Axel's heroics. To them, the dog was more than a protector. He was a legend, a symbol that good could triumph over fear. Lucy and Tommy Briggs, once burdened by poverty and fear, now walked a different path. Their bravery in speaking out had brought light to Snake's dealings, and with support from the Women's Association and townsfolk, a community fund was created. At the spring town meeting, Mayor Whitman announced with pride that Lucy, 17 and resilient, and Tommy, only 12 but already hardened by hardship, would be the first recipients of new scholarships. Lucy, dressed in a plain blue dress, her blonde hair tied back with a ribbon, accepted the announcement with tears in her eyes. "I only wanted to protect my brother," she said softly. "But this town protected us in return." Tommy grinned wide, clutching Axel around the neck as the shepherd licked his cheek, the boy's laughter carrying through the square. For the first time, he no longer dreamed of quick money or escape. He dreamed of school, of building something better than what Snake had offered. As spring came to Riverbend, a fragile but steady peace settled over the town. The saloon's lights no longer burned. The streets no longer echoed with the whispers of fear. Farmers returned to their fields, children to their schools, and women to homes no longer haunted by debts and dice. One evening, Claire stood on the courthouse steps, watching the sun dip behind the snow-capped mountains. Ethan approached, Axel trotting happily between them. They exchanged no grand words, only a look that carried gratitude, understanding, and the promise of a life rebuilt. Riverbend had been scarred, but its people had chosen to fight, to heal, to rise. And as dawn painted the valley with light, the town stood ready for its new beginning. Ethan, Claire, and Axel, once broken, now whole, had become more than survivors. They were symbols of faith, courage, and hope, a reminder that even in the coldest winters, dawn always came. Sometimes miracles do not come with lightning or trumpets. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through the courage of a town that refuses to bow to fear, through the loyalty of a dog who never leaves his partner's side, and through the strength of broken hearts that choose to heal instead of surrender. In Riverbend, justice felt like a miracle, but it was also the result of ordinary people standing together, guided by faith that light can overcome darkness. In our own daily lives, we may not face Snake Mercer or chains in the snow, but we all face battles, fear, doubt, or pain we think no one else sees. This story reminds us that God works in mysterious ways, often through the kindness and bravery of others. Hope is never truly lost, and dawn always follows the night. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and if you believe in miracles, type Amen below. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more stories of faith, courage, and second chances. May God bless you and your family with peace, strength, and new beginnings.